make sure my husband never finds this.
With those words, my daughter's friend handed me a letter. A week ago, my daughter, Jessica, passed away in a car accident. She was still carrying the baby she had finally conceived after a long struggle with infertility. Why did she give this to me? Puzzled, I opened the envelope and found a plastic card and a key inside. Following the instructions in the letter, I headed to a certain place. There, I found Jessica's notebook with the words, "My husband is going to kill me." My name is Michelle Turner, and I'm 53. My husband passed away 23 years ago, and since then, I've raised my only daughter, Jessica, while working as a pharmacist. 3 years ago, Jessica got married. When she moved out, I initially felt a sense of loneliness. But soon enough, I got used to living alone and started enjoying my freedom. Meanwhile, Jessica, who had learned all the household skills from me while living at home, proudly said things like, "A real homemaker knows how to use up ingredients before they spoil," which I found endearing. And what made me happiest was seeing Jessica so full of joy.
Hi, Mom. I stopped by after my checkup.
Oh, welcome back. How's the baby?
Great. Everything's on track.
Yes, Jessica was now 5 months pregnant. After a long journey through infertility treatments, her voice full of happiness when she shared the news of her pregnancy is something I still remember vividly.
But I've been feeling a little anemic lately.
Oh no, really? You should have told me sooner. Come, take a rest here for a bit. I guided Jessica to the couch in the living room and made her a warm cup of tea. My daughter's home is about a 20-minute bus ride from here. The hospital is roughly halfway between her house and mine, so she often stopped by on her way back from her checkups. How's Mark? Mark, Jessica's husband, works for a food manufacturing company. Even though Jessica always had her checkups on weekdays, and I figured Mark would be at work anyway, I couldn't help but ask each time. And every time, Jessica would cheerfully reply, "He's at the office." So, this time, when Jessica's expression suddenly tensed for a moment, it caught me off guard. "What's wrong? Did you two have a fight?"
Oh, no. It's not like that.
"If something's bothering you, you can always talk to me." Seeing my daughter looking troubled and somewhat downcast, I felt concerned.
It's nothing. He's just on a business trip today. So can I stay for dinner?
"That's fine, but..."
Yay. Your cooking is always so good, Mom, and the baby loves it too.
Then Jessica's usual smile returned as she spoke to her belly. "Right. Well, they're a married couple. They go through things, I guess." Even though she's my daughter, I knew it wasn't my place to pry any further. So I decided not to ask any more questions. But I never imagined that a day would come when I'd deeply regret not pushing her for more. That day came just 2 days after Jessica had stopped by. I received a call on my cell phone. "A car accident? Jessica?" The voice on the other end belonged to a man I didn't recognize. He identified himself as a police officer, and his words sounded like something out of a movie, far from reality. Still, I rushed to the designated hospital as he instructed, only to find my daughter lying quietly on the bed, eyes closed. The doctor looked regretful as he said, "I'm sorry, but the baby didn't make it either." "Jessica, this can't be true. You just came by the other day, full of life." It all felt like a terrible dream. But when I touched her body, she felt so cold. Jessica, Jessica. No matter how many times I called, she didn't respond. Then, a male police officer who had been standing behind me spoke hesitantly.
The car's dashcam recorded your daughter just before the accident.
His calm tone left me unable to even respond. I just stood there, silently looking at Jessica, who remained unresponsive.
It appears she was feeling unwell and staggered into the road. That's when.
The officer continued explaining, and his words made me remember Jessica mentioning she'd been feeling lightheaded. She seemed so energetic back then. Was she pushing herself too hard to keep me from worrying? Even though the officer kept talking, I could no longer hear anything he was saying. It felt as if time had stopped for me, just as I was lost in that moment.
Jessica.
The door suddenly burst open, and Mark, Jessica's husband, rushed in. Mark.
I was at work when I got the call from the police saying Jessica had been in an accident. Oh, Jessica.
He ran over to Jessica's side, clinging to her body and crying out in anguish. Seeing him so openly mourning without concern for who might be watching made my chest ache as if it was being squeezed tight. Before I knew it, I gently placed my hands on his shoulders. Thank you for grieving so much for her.
Of course, Jessica was my beloved wife.
Yes, Jessica was so loved by you. Thank you. When I said that, he broke down in tears again. Watching Mark like that, I felt a deep sense of helplessness. But at that moment, I couldn't shed any tears. It was because I still couldn't fully accept the reality in front of me. The days that followed were a whirlwind. From planning her funeral to handling insurance, bank accounts, and notifying acquaintances, there was just so much that needed to be done. Of course, I thought of asking Mark for help. But there was a reason that made it impossible.
I'm so sorry, Michelle, but I haven't been able to pull myself together yet.
Mark, looking completely exhausted, said he couldn't do anything. Under normal circumstances, as Jessica's husband, he might have been the one to take charge as the chief mourner. However, having lost both his wife and unborn child all at once, I wanted to give him as much space as I could. So I decided to take care of everything myself. 2 weeks passed from the funeral, and just when things around me started to settle down, I realized I hadn't had a moment to grieve. Perhaps due to the intensity of the past weeks, I found myself spending my days at home, doing nothing but staring blankly. Even though my body was utterly exhausted, I couldn't seem to sleep. And I didn't have the energy to do anything, nor did I have an appetite. I had taken some time off work, so I only left the house for the bare minimum of grocery shopping. Living like that, I lost track of how much time had passed. Then, one day,
Well, my name is Kate Anderson. We met the other day at the funeral home.
the visitor who came to my door was Kate, Jessica's friend. I first met Kate at the funeral, but I had heard Jessica talk about her many times before. At the service, Kate was kind enough to check on me while I was running around handling various things by myself. She's a very thoughtful young woman.
I'm sorry to drop by like this. I tried calling a few times, but I couldn't get through.
Oh, I'm sorry I didn't notice. I guess I'm still feeling a bit worn out. Truthfully, I had noticed the phone ringing. but I just couldn't bring myself to do anything. And I'd been so sluggish lately that the calls always ended before I could pick up. And I didn't have the energy to call back either. Kate looked at me with concern.
You're not. Okay, are you? I didn't expect any of this to happen either.
I know. It still feels like I'm stuck in a dream.
I brought some cake. Would you like to have some with me? Jessica once told me. My mom loves this kind.
She did? Thank you. Let me make us some tea. Come on in. Holding back the tears that were welling up, I invited Kate into the living room. We sat together, sharing the cake and hot tea. It was the first time in a while that I felt like I could actually taste something. Kate, always good with people, seemed to understand my feelings and kept the conversation light. However, after we finished eating, she hesitated for a moment before pulling out a letter from her bag. It seemed this was the real reason for her visit.
I've been holding on to this for Jessica. Michelle, it's for you.
What? She gave this to you? For me? The envelope she handed me was slightly larger than usual, and when I took it, I felt something hard inside. On the front, it clearly read, "To Mom." In Jessica's handwriting, unmistakably. I couldn't take my eyes off those words and just stared at the envelope. Seeing this, Kate explained why she had been the one holding onto the letter.
I've had this for about 2 weeks now. When Jessica gave it to me, she said, "Make sure my husband doesn't find it."
Her husband, Mark?
Yes. She also told me, if something happens to me, make sure this gets to my mom.
Why would she say something like that?
I don't know. I thought it was strange too, but since Jessica was pregnant, I figured she might have a lot of worries.
Kate spoke with a serious expression, choosing her words carefully, probably to be mindful of my feelings. She continued speaking slowly.
At that time, I just laughed it off and said, "What a silly thing to say, don't worry," and didn't ask her any more questions.
I see.
But now, I regret not being more supportive and listening to her.
As she spoke, Kate pressed her fingers against her eyes, holding back tears. Seeing her like this, I saw a reflection of myself in her. I understand how Kate feels. I feel the same way. After all, when I last saw Jessica, I had sensed that she seemed a bit down, but I chose to just watch over her instead. I kept thinking that if I had done something, even if it seemed intrusive, maybe I could have prevented all of this. Lost in these thoughts, I must have frozen in place because Kate gently patted my shoulder.
Now, please see for yourself what Jessica wanted to tell you, Michelle.
Yes, you're right. I'll open it now. I cut open the top of the envelope with scissors. Yet, there was something that didn't quite sit right with me. It's strange that she didn't want Mark to find this. Feeling a sense of unease in my chest, I opened the envelope. Inside, there was a small note. To Mom, when you receive this letter, please go to this place. Is that all?
Where is this place?
Let's see. Oh, it's written here. A safe deposit box? At the bottom of the note, there was the name of a bank and its address. And inside the envelope, separate from the note, I found a plastic card and a small silver key. It seemed these were needed for accessing the safe deposit box. Kate and I exchanged a glance. Neither of us had ever heard of Jessica using something like a safe deposit box to store anything. What could she possibly have kept in there? Thinking about it wouldn't give us any answers. So Kate and I decided to head to the location mentioned in the note. It took about an hour to get from my house to the bank. I never knew it worked like this. How interesting. The plastic card served as a key to access the room where the safe deposit boxes were, and the silver key was needed to open the box itself. Now we'll find out what Jessica left here. With my heart racing, I inserted the key into the box. I could hear Kate swallow nervously beside me. It's open. Inside, we found a notebook and a USB drive. I picked up the notebook, and as soon as I opened the first page, I felt the blood drain from my face. Because written clearly in Jessica's handwriting were the words, "I am going to be killed by Mark." What does this mean? My heart pounded even harder than before. But we couldn't stay in the private room for long, so Kate and I hurried back to my house to figure out what to do next. When we arrived home, I was too anxious to even take off my coat and rushed straight to the living room, where I opened the notebook. For a while, the two of us pored over the pages together. I don't know how much time passed like that. By the time I noticed, it was 6 p.m. and the room had grown dim. I turned on the light switch, and as the room instantly brightened, I glanced back. There I saw Kate, trying to hold back her sobs as she cried.
I can't believe Jessica went through such a horrible experience.
Kate.
If only I had asked her more questions back then.
It's not your fault. I didn't notice anything either, even though she was my own daughter.
Michelle. But I can't believe it. That Mark would have an affair, and on top of that, treat Jessica like this.
According to what was written in the notebook, Mark's spending habits had become extravagant at some point. And whenever Jessica tried to talk to him, he would laugh and say, "We have money, so it's okay to have a little fun, right?" And then, not long after Jessica found out she was pregnant, unsettling incidents started happening around the house. Once, a piece of paper was on the stairs, and she nearly slipped and fell. Another time, plates from the cupboard were precariously stacked, and when she opened the door, they came crashing down. And finding expired, rotten food mixed into the refrigerator, that's just unbelievable. I knew my daughter had learned from me and was diligent with household chores. So, even if she had overlooked something, it was hard to believe that there would be a huge pile of spoiled food. And it didn't seem like these things were accidents. Jessica made it clear in her notes that it was all orchestrated by Mark. Mark and Jessica seemed to get along so well. When he rushed to the hospital, I never for a moment thought that Mark's grief might have been an act. As I read further, I learned that Jessica discovered the truth by accidentally overhearing Mark talking on the phone. From the conversation, she realized that he was speaking to his affair partner.
Do you think Jessica's husband tried to harm her because she found out about his affair?
Kate's words made me pause for a moment.
I can't believe it. Why would he do something so awful?
She clenched her fists, trembling with anger. Kate probably thought that Mark might have tried to get rid of Jessica just because he wanted to be with another woman, such a shallow motive. But there was one other thing that came to my mind. Last year, Jessica inherited her paternal grandfather's estate, My husband had already passed away, and there were no other siblings, so Jessica was the sole heir.
Oh, I didn't know that.
My father-in-law owned several apartment buildings and had significant assets, so Jessica received a substantial amount of money.
I had never heard about this before.
Maybe Jessica felt uncomfortable talking about money, especially since the amount was so large. It seemed that she hadn't even confided in her best friend about it.
Did Mark know about it?
Of course, they were married, and because of that money, Jessica was able to continue her fertility treatments. Yes, fertility treatments are expensive. Jessica had been visiting the clinic for a long time, and she often wondered whether she should give up due to the financial burden. Then, she received the inheritance. Thanks to that, Jessica could continue the treatments, and eventually, she became pregnant. But even so, just then, a sudden realization seemed to strike Kate, and her eyes widened.
Do you think Mark targeted Jessica for her inheritance?
It's not written explicitly in the notebook, but I'm sure Jessica suspected that too. And also, I pointed to a part in the notebook where Jessica wrote about how her husband had said, "We've got money, so there's no harm in having a little fun."
You're right. Otherwise, even if he was cheating, it wouldn't make sense for him to go so far as to threaten her life.
At this point, the full truth wasn't clear, but that's the conclusion we reached. Regardless, Jessica realized that her own husband was threatening her life. Even as her mother, I couldn't begin to fathom the depth of her despair. I suddenly remembered the time when Jessica's expression darkened at the mention of Mark's name. She must have already been struggling then. I gripped the notebook tightly in my hands. It was something Jessica had written at the risk of her life. Some of the words were smudged and uneven, perhaps because she had written them while crying. She looked so happy. If that accident was Mark's doing, it's a clear crime. As these thoughts crossed my mind, a burning anger toward Mark welled up inside me. To make matters worse, as things stood, Jessica's inheritance was going to that man, her spouse. Kate, I won't let this end like this. No matter what, I'll make sure he understands the pain Jessica went through. That's the resolution I made. A few days later, I found myself hiding out at a certain location. It was Jessica and Mark's apartment. Mark was sprawled on the couch in a messy living room, casually swirling a glass of wine. I watched this scene from a place where they couldn't see me.
Honestly, I should be grateful to Jessica, right?
Mark said with a smirk, while the woman lying on the carpet eating potato chips clung to his side. She had to be his mistress. As she laughed and said, "What a heartless guy, his own wife's dead," Mark pulled her closer.
What are you talking about? Thanks to her being gone, we can be together like this, right?
Mark leaned over the woman, a slimy grin spreading across his face.
She kept spending so much money on those fertility treatments. It's not like I even wanted a kid in the first place.
He sat up, pouring more wine into his glass, grumbling that Jessica kept nagging him about wanting children, and that he had only gone along with it because it was easier than arguing. Then, as if irritated by something, he downed the wine in one gulp.
But I really panicked when she got pregnant. If she has a kid, I'll have less my inheritance, right?
Whether it was the alcohol or showing off in front of his mistress, Mark kept running his mouth.
Let me tell you, it wasn't easy. I had to set traps around the house to make it look like an accident. I tried to get her to fall down the stairs or have plates drop on her head.
When his mistress teased him about how those plans hadn't worked, Mark got defensive, a hint of irritation in his voice.
She just had dumb luck. But hey, in the end, I got lucky, right? I just scared her a bit and she jumped into the road herself.
Mark let out a coarse, grating laugh. The woman clung to him even tighter. But in the next instant, there was a loud bang, and the living room door flew open with enough force to almost break.
Who's there?
It's me. Mark and his mistress froze, staring at me like deer caught in the headlights. But they quickly snapped out of it, and both began to shout.
Jesus Christ, barging in here like this.
His mistress clung to Mark's arm, tugging on it furiously. Mark, who is this old lady? Does it help if I say I'm Jessica's mother?
Wait, so you're Mark's mother-in-law?
The mistress looked panicked. My sudden appearance must have been a total shock to her. She stood there with her mouth agape, completely frozen. Meanwhile, Mark, who had just gotten over his initial surprise, now turned bright red with anger.
Get out of here. You're trespassing. Get out now.
So what? Oh, by the way, I heard everything. Your whole conversation.
What?
Ignoring Mark's glare, I walked over to the wall socket, yanked out the plug, and slammed it onto the floor. With a cracking sound, it broke open, revealing a bugging device. I heard everything that went on here. Mark's affair, and everything he did to Jessica. To gather evidence, I had used the spare key Jessica had given me, with Kate's help, to plant the device. There was also a hidden camera that allowed me to monitor the situation in real time. So even if I wasn't physically present, I knew exactly what the two of them were up to. You've said quite a lot, haven't you? But thanks to that, I got all the evidence I need against you too. I had been sitting in a car parked nearby, listening, intending to give them more time. But when their words turned out to be far worse than I expected, and I realized I had enough evidence, I decided to confront them.
What you did is a crime. I'll call the cops on you.
What are you talking about? You two are the ones who should be worried if the police get involved. I've got this. I played back the recording from the bugging device for both of them to hear. And then, to my surprise, Mark started marching straight toward me. What are you trying to do?
Hand that over to me.
No way.
Then you leave me no choice.
The look on his face suggested he might attack me at any moment. I quickly ran into the kitchen and grabbed the nearest thing I could find. Don't come any closer.
What the hell is that?
Both Mark and his mistress turned pale. Their eyes were fixed on what I held in my hand. Because I was gripping a kitchen knife. It was probably the one Jessica used every day. Clutching it tightly, I pointed the blade straight at Mark. Try anything funny, and I'll use this.
Haha.
What's so funny?
You think an old lady like you has the guts to do something like that? Go ahead. Give it a shot if you think you can.
Mark, who had initially turned pale, seemed to think he had the upper hand in strength, or that I wasn't serious. He taunted me, pointing to his own chest. His mistress smirked behind him, and I felt a surge of anger rise within me. Don't mess with me. This is for avenging Jessica. With the knife still in hand, I glared at them both. My intensity seemed to finally scare them, and they began to back away, looking nervous as they retreated toward the living room. Holding the knife tightly, I kept my eyes on Jessica's tormentors. Mark yelled out, "Wait!"
You've got it all wrong. I didn't do anything. It was all her. Megan did everything.
What?
Megan's eyebrow twitched in response to his words.
She was totally obsessed with me, always saying Jessica was in the way. She told me what to do.
But Megan immediately shouted back, "You're the one who suggested getting rid of your wife, and you planned everything."
Hey, what are you saying?
Mark tried to cover her mouth with his hand, but she pushed him away. Megan tried to justify herself, claiming that it was Mark who attacked Jessica with a knife close to her due date, and that Jessica ran into the road trying to escape, so she wasn't at fault.
You wanted this to happen too.
I never thought you'd actually go through with it.
Megan and Mark were yelling at each other. Tears blurred my vision, but I couldn't tell whether they came from anger or sorrow. I screamed, gripping the knife handle even tighter in my hands. Then I sensed someone bursting into the room.
Michelle,
The sudden voice made me freeze in place. I turned around, and there stood Kate. She was drenched in sweat, gasping for breath. "Why are you here?"
I couldn't reach you by phone, and you weren't at home. I had a feeling, so I came here, and I heard fighting from inside.
Breathing heavily, Kate approached me and gently placed her hand over mine, the one holding the knife. Since the day she helped me set up the listening device, she'd been worried that I might do something reckless.
Michelle, I completely understand how you feel. I can't forgive him either. If I could, I'd avenge Jessica with my own hands.
With tears welling up in her eyes, Kate looked straight at me.
But I don't think Jessica would want this. She would never want her mother to get hurt for her sake. Jessica would hate that.
"Oh, what am I doing?"
You know better than anyone how kind Jessica was, don't you?
Her words made the strength leave my body. The knife slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor. That's right, Jessica was. She was so kind. No matter how much she suffered, Jessica would never try to hurt others. As I took Kate's words to heart, I found myself recalling Jessica's bright, cheerful smile. "I'm sorry for worrying you. I just meant to scare them, but I lost control and got too carried away."
I see, I thought.
"But thank you for stopping me. If you hadn't, I might have." Kate shook her head and smiled. "I'm just glad you're back to your usual self, Michelle." A moment of warmth filled the room. But that moment quickly faded as Kate turned her glare toward Mark and Megan, freezing them in place.
I called the police. I have recordings of your entire conversation, as well as other evidence of what you did to Jessica. It's over for both of you.
At her words, they began to tremble. Megan was the first to move. She shoved Mark aside and made a dash for the front door. But it was Mark who stopped her, trying to push her out of the way so he could escape first.
Get out of my way. I'm leaving first.
No, I'm going first. Don't get in my way.
Shut up.
Mark roughly shoved Megan, causing her to stumble and fall to the floor. Then, as if driven to madness, Megan glared at Mark with bloodshot eyes and let out a hysterical scream as she lunged at him. As she stood up, she grabbed the knife I had dropped, clutching it in her hand.
No way.
Just as Mark's scream echoed through the room, Megan stumbled back. Her hand, clutching the knife, was now stained bright red. Mark made a gurgling sound, unable to form words, before collapsing onto the floor.
Help me. If I don't get help, I'll.
Mark, sprawled on the floor, reached out toward me. I looked down at him with cold eyes. Why should I help a man like this? That's what I thought, but then. Kate, please call an ambulance for him.
Okay.
I noticed the hopeful look in Mark's eyes and shot him a piercing glare. Don't get the wrong idea. I haven't forgiven you, but Jessica would never have left someone suffering in front of her, no matter who they were. I said this, wiping away the tears that fell from my eyes. Just then, the intercom rang, and a voice from outside the front door called out, "Police!" Megan was arrested on the spot. Mark was taken to the hospital, but later investigations revealed that the two had conspired together and attacked Jessica for her inheritance. A year later, both Mark and Megan were convicted and imprisoned. From what I've heard, they've given up on life, showing no spark in their eyes and not speaking to anyone. Mark in particular doesn't even respond when the guards call out to him, so he's under strict supervision. I've slowly started to accept the reality of losing Jessica and have been finding my way back to daily life. And Kate, now married, is 5 months pregnant. When she visits me, she always looks so happy, and seeing her smile brings me joy too. I truly hope that Kate finds happiness, not just for herself, but for Jessica's sake as well. That's my deepest wish.